This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Soul of Business with Blaine Bartlett. I am your host, Blaine Bartlett. You know, I've been working in the field of leadership development for, 45 years, approximately, something like that. I mean, that's why my hair is the color that it is. But one of the things that I, latched onto back in the 1980s, early 1980s, was some of the work that Daniel Goleman had been doing around emotional intelligence. And there's a canard that is, talked about a lot that, fully 90%, sometimes a little bit higher than that, of a leader's effectiveness is steeped in and dependent on their emotional intelligence. It's not a question of skill set. It's a question of emotional intelligence. And it becomes incumbent if you actually buy into that, which I did, and I do, in the work that I do with my clients. This is one of the focal points that we work with. It's an inside-out process. I have to know myself in order to be emotionally intelligent. And in the bedrock of there's 5 basic components to emotional intelligence, but the bedrock capacity or domain that we look at is awareness. Both awareness of self, but also awareness of others. And I'm going on in that little riff for a bit here because my guest today, Jamie Goff. Dr. Jamie Goff. She's got a Ph.D. And has spent a lot of time in healthcare, working with leaders in healthcare. She's got a new book out called The Secure. I'll stumble on my S's here. The Secure Leadership. And I'm going to just quote here. How our emotional patterns like people-pleasing, avoiding conflict, or perfectionism quietly shape how we lead, connect, and grow. Leadership isn't just about what you do. It's about who you are. So with that as a kind of a preface, I want to just welcome Jamie to the show. Great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Blaine. I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
You've spent quite a bit of time in healthcare, and we were talking about that, kind of in the quote unquote green room before we went live here. How did you, number one, get interested in leadership development? Mm-hmm. What were some of the challenges that you ran into in a clinical environment, hospital setting? And I'll just kind of put it in that domain for a moment. We'll genericize it later. But the challenges that you ran into, and where did emotional intelligence actually come into play?
Yeah. So your first part of the question, how did I get into leadership development?
How did you get into this questioning leader? What is leadership? What's it all about, Alfie?
Yeah. I honestly, I think I somewhat stumbled into leadership development. And it was generated initially by being a leader myself. The beginning of my career was actually in a bit of a different field. My PhD is in couple and family therapy, and I spent the first half of my career in higher education. I was a professor and, had a therapy practice and, supervising students who were being trained to be therapists. But eventually in my university moved into leadership roles. First as a department chair, and then, eventually as a dean of one of our colleges. And it's when I became a leader that I began really thinking about leadership development and leadership behavior, the impact of leadership on teams and organizations. And I really started to think about how what I knew from my expertise from the world of psychotherapy, and specifically systems theory, how that applied to leadership and team dynamics. And so that's when I first became interested. And I was looking for something else to do. I was kind of not really feeling higher ed administration anymore. And so I started to explore executive coaching and leadership development. So I ended up going back to school and getting a graduate certificate in executive coaching, and then decided that that's really where I wanted to focus my time and attention. And so eventually that's how I ended up in my role as Director of Leadership Development at Christus Health. And so your second question was about like the challenges, right? The challenges that I observed specifically in clinical settings. And I think that one of the biggest challenges that really exists at an organizational level for healthcare leaders, especially when you think about nursing leaders, is span of control. And that's something that in many ways is outside of the, it's kind of in the maybe a circle of influence, but not within that circle of control for any individual leader, right? But it's a reality that they find themselves in, that, our nursing leaders in acute care settings often have 50, 60 more direct reports, people that they have to invest in on a daily basis. And that is extraordinarily challenging.
You can't do it.
Yeah, not in the way that I know many of our leaders really wanted to, right? And so the challenge then becomes in those settings, how to manage that as effectively as possible, and to work within those teams and those groups to create environments where people feel like they can flourish, and without really having the time to connect as deeply, maybe in a one-on-one way as you might want to. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges in healthcare. Yeah. So, with nurse leaders having, to deal with that span of control, which is just, a huge challenge. And I think, hopefully healthcare systems are beginning to see that and beginning to do what they can to modify that, to make some changes. I know the healthcare system I was a part of has really began to strategically look at some of those issues, because, one of the other big challenges is retention and engagement, because, it can be challenging to keep bedside RNs specifically, and some other roles too. And there aren't as many people who are being trained in those areas, right? So we don't have as many new graduates in nursing as we used to have. And so really engaging and retaining people is important. And obviously so much of that has to do with the leader. So it's like, what can organizations do to create conditions within which leaders can be their best selves, so that they can really contribute to some of those key metrics around engagement and retention?
The idea of emotional engagement, it's the holy grail of every organization inside healthcare and outside of healthcare. Emotional engagement, and where I'm going with this, this question has to do with the nature of burnout. When I was doing, and I still do, a lot of work in healthcare systems, and particularly with the nurses, but also with the docs. Burnout is a significant issue. And as a consequence of burnout, retention is is a symptom
right.
of burnout, so to speak here. How does emotional intelligence? We've got a system, and you mentioned systems dynamics, but we've got a healthcare system that's fundamentally flawed and broken in so many ways. From a leadership perspective, where does emotional intelligence come into play if I find myself in a seat of power, or a seat of authority, a seat of responsibility, a leadership seat, and I've got a system that is chewing people up? Both literally and figuratively, I think. Where does emotional intelligence come into that?
Yeah. And that can be really challenging, because like we mentioned earlier, there are some things that are, within an individual leader's control, and some things that are outside of that. But even for the things that are outside of their circle of control, right, they still can have influence. And I think when it comes to emotional intelligence, the more, having a stronger skills in emotional intelligence and capabilities in emotional intelligence increases your influence and creates opportunities for you to be more influential. Because if if you are emotionally intelligent, you know how to, you're self-aware, but you also know how to manage yourself well.
Yeah.
So when it comes to maybe having those conversations where you're trying to, at the like higher levels of leadership, where you're trying to influence decision makers to maybe make some changes, if you're someone who is not managing yourself well, and you're allowing your, anger and frustration, which are certainly there and certainly justified in many ways, but if you lead with that, instead of having the emotional intelligence to regulate yourself effectively and to speak
Mhm.
from, a just a, kind of a calmer, more thoughtful way, then people shut down and they can't hear you. So being able to regulate yourself emotionally, to communicate clearly and effectively about what the challenges are, and about how those challenges are making it difficult to, achieve goals, how they're hurting things like patient safety and patient satisfaction and quality, right? And so being able to kind of connect all of those dots in a way that's calm and very thoughtful, I think is a skill that comes with emotional intelligence. And then it's also, for many leaders, they sit in the middle, right, between
Mhm.
executive leadership and the frontline staff. And
Yeah.
so having the elements of social awareness and relationship management that are associated with emotional intelligence are critically important to be able to manage that tension that
Mhm.
those, kind of clinical directors, nursing supervisors, nurse managers feel, managing the tension and being able to have that awareness of how what's coming from the top is impacting their teams, how they can communicate that in a way that really clearly explains the why, but then they can also close the loop and go back up to share feedback in an upward manner. So yeah, I really believe that emotional intelligence is the crux around which everything else circles.
And the way that you're describing it, and I love the way that you answered that question, Jamie. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of what can I control? I mean, there's not a lot I can, that I
Mm-hmm.
actually have control over. What I do have control over are my thoughts, my behaviors, and my feelings.
Yes.
That whole attitudinal component.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, being able to grok, if you will, grok it. That's my center of power, my center of
Mm-hmm.
influence.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to be in a high-powered situation in a complex, toxic environment, how do I influence it? Well, I have to let go of the notion that I'm going to control it to
Yes.
begin
Yeah.
with. Then it becomes a localized question of influence. How can I actually facilitate people engaging emotionally with what we have here in front of
Mm-hmm.
us right now?
Mm-hmm.
Now, and your publicist sent me a couple of questions, and I laughed at one of them, and I want to continue this thread because I think it's going to be interesting to see how you answer this here. What are some of the surprising lessons from pop culture
Oh
bosses
yeah. Yeah.
like Ted Lasso or The Office? Yeah, how do we apply some of those lessons, and
Mm-hmm.
what are those lessons that we could apply
Yeah.
in this kind of a fast-paced environment,
Mm-hmm.
where things are changing, where I have little to no real control over what's going on? What can I do there, and what does Ted Lasso suggest is possible?
Yeah, Ted Lasso is an interesting example
I love
because
that too.
yeah, oh, it's a fantastic show, and I think most of us would look at Ted Lasso and say, oh, Ted Lasso is an example of a great leader. But Ted Lasso is not always the most emotionally intelligent
Right.
leader, right? And we can kind of see that he has a lot of challenges himself. And I would probably, in my book, I talk about secure, anxious, and avoidant leaders.
Yep.
And I would probably classify Ted Lasso as a bit of an anxious leader. And he's clearly dealing with some maybe more severe anxiety. You kind of see that in the show, right? When he's like working with his therapist and
Yeah.
dealing with some of that. But he's really seeking validation,
Mm-hmm.
and you see that in him, not as an extreme way as like Michael Scott from The Office, which I often refer
There's
to
the
as
other
an
one. Yep.
example too. He's also an example of an anxious leader. Ted Lasso is more functional in the way that he manages that. So I think he's developed some emotional intelligence skills where he does have perhaps a little bit more self-awareness. Whereas like in the example of Michael Scott from the TV show The Office, there is very little, if any. He's a more extreme version of that. But I think what we see in the Ted Lasso show is that he does have awareness that everything is not okay, for him, and he's working on himself. He is doing the work that he needs to do to try to become better so that he can have a higher level of emotional intelligence, specifically with his like relationship management, social awareness types of skills, and managing himself, but so that he's becoming more secure. And we kind of see that journey in the Ted Lasso character. Whereas in the Michael Scott character, I don't know, maybe you see a little bit of it toward the end of the show, but not much.
A bit of back Eddie there.
Yes, yeah.
I'm interested in this from the standpoint of some of the work that you've done, a lot of the work that you did actually as a couples therapist. And the idea of, and I'm somewhat familiar with some of this work, but the idea of attachment theory. How does this actually come into play, particularly when we're looking at high pressure environments where there are the potential, or there is the potential, and oftentimes there is not just the potential, but it's actually here, conflict. Yeah. How does attachment theory actually come into play with this? And first of all, what is attachment theory? And then there's also avoidant attachment styles that kind of come into play here.
Yeah. So basically, very simplistic, short description.
This is the Ph.D. conversation.
Attachment theory is basically it's the science around the importance of human connection. And attachment theory would say that human connection is the most fundamental human need, more than anything else. And that especially when we're young and we're infants and we come into this world, we survive based on the quality of our attachment relationships, which of course at that time in our lives is primarily with our caregivers.
Right.
As we grow, we continue to have those needs for human connection, and they're met through different attachment relationships. We form other attachment relationships with, family members or with romantic partners, or even with like teachers and mentors and coaches who provide that for us as well. And I would say leaders can provide that for us. And so when it comes to how attachment theory really influences how we show up in like a leadership context or in conflict, for example, I think our attachment style informs how we answer two fundamental questions that are really important. The first question.
Before you get to the questions, a little bit about attachment styles. So that we've got a context for how these questions come into play.
Yeah. Well, and I think they relate very closely. So our attachment style is really based on how we answer those two questions.
Okay.
Yes. And so the first question is, am I worthy? So am I worthy of love, attention, care, dignity, etc.? The second question is, are other people trustworthy? And based on our early experiences, we kind of develop our answer to those two questions based on experiences with other people. And so we kind of create these neural patterns around them. And so there are three kind of flowing out of that, three attachment styles. The first is secure. And so someone with a secure attachment style is answering both of those questions, yes, right? They learned and came to believe, formed a core belief that, yeah, I'm worthy. People care for me. They respond to me when I'm in need or when I'm in distress, and I can count on other people to be there. And so that's that. There, I see myself as worthy, and other people are trustworthy. They're going to come when I call, right? So it's kind of, they answer both of those questions, yes. The insecure styles really answer both of those questions, no, for somewhat different reasons. The insecure, anxious style, which we kind of talked about Ted Lasso and Michael Scott as pop culture examples of that. They tended to have caregiving experiences that were very chaotic and inconsistent. And so they're really driven then as they grow and kind of become adults and leaders, they're really driven by a need for validation. They want to belong. They want to be liked. They're trying to prove to themselves that they're worthy, of other people's care and respect. And so when it comes to conflict, what often ends up happening is that they become very hyper aroused. So these are the folks who will lash out, blow up. All of the emotions are right there on the surface. They're wearing them all over their sleeves, and no one has any doubt that this person is upset about something. Right. And so they don't manage conflict well because they are overwhelmed by their emotion and they can't manage it. So that's the insecure, anxious style. The insecure avoidance style. What's happened for them is they've also developed the belief that, maybe I really need to prove myself, and other people aren't trustworthy because they grew up in caregiving environments that were pretty dismissive and where they were often ignored. So what they learn is that I have to take care of myself. I can't count on anybody else.
Yeah.
It's only me. I'm the only one that can do it, and I'm the only one that can do it right. And so the pop culture example that I often refer to here is the Miranda Priestly character from the movie The Devil Wears Prada.
The Devil Wears Prada, yeah.
Yeah, so where it's like a very, again, dismissive, arrogant approach to leadership where I just have contempt for everyone around me because I don't see them as being competent or making contributions at all, and I'm just surrounded by idiots. That's kind of like how these leaders often show up. And so when it comes to conflict for them, often they honestly don't want to be bothered by it. And they will often just shut down and shut people out when they're dealing with conflict because they don't see the sense in it, because they think they're the only ones that are right. So they're not interested in listening to other people's perspectives. They're not going to receive feedback well or be able to hear disagreements from other people because, again, they've kind of come to believe that they're the only one that can really take care of things in an appropriate way, and they're the only one they can count on. So that's a kind of a really quick descriptions of those three.
No, I love this because, the focus of this show is the soul of business. And the way that I describe that has to do with, first of all, just an assumption, and it's an assertion that I make out of that assumption, that everything has a life force associated with it. And that life force is continuously looking for expression. And when I tap into that life force, the experience is aliveness. It's connection and it's aliveness. This is true for the human being. It's also true for the tree that's outside my window. And it's also true for the businesses in which we find ourselves, living and working oftentimes. And from a leadership perspective, part of my role as a leader is to make accessible access to that spirit. More often than not. And if we're doing that, we've got aliveness in the culture, and we've got creativity and innovation in the culture, that sort of thing. So this question about and I love where this has gone. The idea of attachment disorder, and I'll use the word disorder or attachment health, as another way of looking at it, becomes really interesting. And I'm assuming that your book, The Secure Leader, actually addresses this in some detail.
Yes. Yeah. It absolutely does. It does, for sure. And I think what I try to do in the book is really help people gain that self-awareness around what their primary attachment style might be, and then guide them through a process of really deconstructing that for themselves, kind of looking back in an honest way at their experiences so that they can understand, like, why do I engage in the behavior patterns that I do? Why do I deal with conflict the way that I do? Why do I lead the way that I do? But we don't want to stay there, right? Because even if you have an anxious or avoidant attachment style, we all have the ability to earn security, is how the literature would speak about that. We all have the ability to earn security, which means that we can actively work to become more secure in the way that we relate to ourselves and others.
Now, you have got a story, and I'm going to bring our conversation to a close here, but you've got a story about how you've actually, this isn't just theoretical, you've lived this. And you discovered in just through the process of developing yourself how your own avoidant attachment style, becoming aware of it, and actually changed how you coached and worked and parented with your clients. Can you give about 8 bars on that so that people
Yeah.
can get a sense that there is a roadmap here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I, growing up, I was, I had, I had a good, like a pretty good
Yeah.
childhood. But I also, I was a latchkey kid. I grew up in the 80s. I was on my own most of the time and, spent lots of time by myself in the woods and really was kind of expected to take care of myself in many ways. So I kind of developed some of those avoidant attachment tendencies, and really came to count on myself. And I did come to believe that, like for example, like in college, I hated group work. I did not want to be bothered by
My hands in the air. Yeah.
all of these
You
other
and I have
people, right?
kindred spirits in this regard.
Yeah, like I can do this better than anybody else. Why do I have to be bothered with this? That's kind of what my attitude was. And then when I first stepped into a leadership role, I actually had an experience where my administrative assistant, because I was a department chair, so I kind of inherited an administrative assistant, and I was so controlling. I would not let her do her job, essentially. I couldn't let go of control of my calendar, of my time, of some of the decisions that really I didn't need to be making. And so, but one day she, in a one-on-one or something, she said to me, she said, "Jamie, you have got to let me do my job." And that, I'm sure in the moment, I probably felt a little defensive about that. But as I look back on that and reflect on it, and then even later as I thought about it, I was like, oh my gosh, she's right. I am so controlling, and I am not letting someone else fulfill their purpose. And I'm taking away her ability to flourish because I'm too controlling. And so that was really eye-opening for me and helped me realize that, okay, this is not the way to lead others. And if I continue on this path, I'm not going to be successful in doing this. And so that was such a good lesson for me to learn. And I'm very grateful for her to, have the courage to speak up and say that to me. And so, yeah, that really just changed. And honestly, that was kind of the thing that made me start thinking about, because I was already a therapist. I already been working in attachment-based therapies with couples and, parents and children. So I was aware of these things, but that's really kind of the first time I was like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe my attachment style has something to do with this. And maybe there's something to be explored here.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you for being vulnerable enough to take that comment in and then astute enough to actually do something with it. That I think that speaks highly of your effectiveness, which you're an executive coach. You've got clients outside as well as inside the healthcare system. So I know that you're successful, and I'm very excited to actually dig into your book a little bit here. The book, again, is called The Secure Leader. And I am assuming people can find it at all of the regular places.
Yes. Yeah. Amazon, bookshop.org for your local booksellers, Barnes and Nobles. Yeah. Anywhere books are sold.
Okay. And where can people get a hold of you if they got a question or if they'd like to kind of get a sense of some of the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is a good place to start. That's drjamiegoff.com. And Jamie is spelled Jaime. So it's drjamiegoff.com. And I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn. So, people can just search for me on LinkedIn as well, and happy to connect that way. And interact, answer questions about, what I do, or if they have questions about what we've talked about, I'd be happy to answer those too.
Yeah. Good. Folks, you've been listening to this conversation with Dr. Jamie Goff, Goff. And check it out. I've been on her website. There's some really good stuff there. So you want to take some time and just go spelunking, if you will. Dig around in it a little bit. And do get a copy of the book, The Secure Leader. You will not be disappointed, particularly if you're looking to be more effective as a leader. Leaders cause movement, and a lot of leaders don't. Put it this way: a lot of leaders aren't particularly elegant about the movement that they cause. So if you're looking for elegance, if you're looking for a prescription for elegance, the secure leader will be the place that you will begin to find some pretty good jewels. Yeah, some suggestions there that will enhance your elegance. And elegance, by the way, in this context has nothing to do with what you're wearing. It has everything to do with minimizing unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Okay. So find a way to do that. And as we sign off here, I'm going to just the admonition that I end every show with. I grew up on a farm and observing nature, much the same as you, walking through the woods, and just everything in nature serves a purpose. I mean, there's nothing in nature that serves solely as a center of accumulation. Everything in nature finds a way to be a center of distribution. The apples fall off the tree and they get utilized. Nothing goes to waste. Everything's a center of distribution at some point in the life cycle. So in your life, as you're listening to this and as you go out from listening to the show today, find a way to be a center of distribution. Give away a smile, give away a hug, give a big tip to your server, whatever it might be. But be a center of distribution. Don't be worried about accumulation, and I think you'll find your life works a whole lot better. Jamie, thank you so much for being such a great guest. I've appreciated it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Blaine.
You bet. Take care. See you on the next show, folks. This episode is sponsored by The Power of You, a leadership resource for entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and anyone intent on developing their leadership impact and supercharging their career. For more information, check the podcast webpage or show notes. Hi, I'd like to ask you to do something for me if you wouldn't mind. If you like this episode, I'd like you to not only subscribe on your favorite site, but I'd also like you to give a rating. Ideally, a 5-star rating would be greatly appreciated. But I think more importantly also would be just some comments. That helps with the algorithm and it helps build the audience with this. And more than anything else, if you could invite somebody else to listen, just share this episode with a friend, with a colleague. And I'd like to see how we can grow the soul of business. I think it makes a difference. Thanks.